It is 3 p.m. in New York, 7 in London, and 4 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Tensions have hit new highs in the Crimean crisis, with reports that Ukrainian soldiers were shot dead. Now, this just hours after Russian President Vladmir Putin signed a treaty to claim Crimea as Russian territory. Western leaders once again emphasized that the annexation will not be recognized, and just earlier this afternoon, Seoul's foreign ministry also said it will not recognize Putin's latest actions. Our Connie Lee starts us off.
In Moscow, the crowds chanted "Russia, Russia," and in Crimea, cheers and applause filled the streets after Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a treaty on Tuesday in front of Parliament to make Crimea part of Russia.
It is such a momentous day today. We want to say that we are very proud of our President Vladimir Putin.
Putin says Russia must now act as Ukraine's new government. And in front of crowds late Tuesday in Moscow's Red Square, he said Crimea has finally returned to its home port to Russia.
We have done a lot together, but we will do much more. We will need to solve many tasks, but I'm confident that we will overcome everything, resolve everything, because we are together. Glory to Russia!
A different scene in Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Residents there are angry over Putin's latest actions.
I want him to stop mocking our people. I want him to stay in Russia and govern the Russians and not touch our people and not torture Ukraine.
And tensions heightened into violence on Tuesday when masked gunmen killed 2 Ukrainian troops and injured at least 2 others. The Ukrainian military has now been ordered to use their weapons to protect and preserve the life of Ukrainian soldiers. Meanwhile, Western leaders, including those in the U.S. and Germany, have condemned Putin's actions.
We would not recognize this attempted annexation.
But it doesn't seem like the Russian president is showing any signs of backing down. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And the European Union and the United States are under pressure to step up their game against Russia. It's either raise or fold. But damage to Russia is unlikely to come with negative consequences for the West, and with billions of dollars of trade hanging in the balance, the stakes are high and there are no easy answers. Our Ji-yeon reports.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has shown no signs of backing down from his decision to annex Crimea, despite threats from both sides of the Atlantic. The speculation is that Putin is taking advantage of the reluctance of the United States and European Union to escalate tensions into a full-blown trade war. Such hostility will hurt Russia, which relies heavily on the EU for trade, but it could also hurt the European countries that import more than 80% of Russia's oil exports and more than 75% of its natural gas. The trade volume between the EU and Russia is estimated to be worth more than $460 billion. An economic crisis in Russia and a troubled EU will also deal a blow to the U.S. economy, just as the Fed is trying to reverse its bond-buying stimulus program. So far, the EU has frozen assets and imposed travel bans on 21 Russians and Ukrainians, and the U.S. has imposed similar sanctions on 7 people. EU leaders may consider additional sanctions on Russia when they meet in Brussels next week, and the list is thought to contain more than 100 people. But many analysts expect the punitive measures to exclude the chiefs of major Russian energy companies, such as Gazprom head Alexei Miller. To put pressure on Putin, the EU and the U.S. could seek to sever diplomatic links by removing Russia from international bodies, such as the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank.
Then we have to recognize that there would be a very high risk of retaliatory sanctions by Russia against American companies and maybe Americans living in Russia.
Already in jeopardy are the many areas where the U.S. and Russia have cooperated. The 2 nations have been working to contain the spread of nuclear weapons. U.S. access to the International Space Station depends solely on Russian rocket launches. And American soldiers moving to and from Afghanistan fly through Russian airspace. Experts believe serious economic and diplomatic repercussions will likely force the West to adjust the levels of additional sanctions. Russia is the United States' 20th largest trading partner, with a trade volume of $38 billion. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has called on Pyongyang to refrain from the kinds of provocative acts that are escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. Ban said Tuesday that North Korea's recent missile launches have stirred tensions, and he urged the communist regime to return to negotiations. North Korea has fired off dozens of short-range missiles into the East Sea in recent weeks. The UN is looking into whether the launches have violated any UN resolutions. China, a veto-wielding member of the UN Security Council, has shown its intent to block a latest UN panel report on human rights violations inside North Korea. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hong Lei said China opposes politicizing human rights issues and intervening in a country's internal affairs in the name of protecting human rights. Now, this comes after a UN commission on Monday called for international efforts to prosecute the leadership in Pyongyang responsible for rights abuses in the north. Beijing also came under fire for repatriating North Koreans trying to defect through China. The spokesperson then said the international community should rather focus on maintaining the current diffusion of tensions on the Korean peninsula. Now, back here in Seoul, South Korea's spy agency under fire for allegedly abusing its power is caught up in yet another scandal, this time after one of its agents was arrested for ordering documents be forged. It's the first time a National Intelligence Service agent has been arrested for acts committed in the line of duty. Ji-yeon reports.
Prosecutors have arrested a South Korean intelligence agent on charges of forging documents in a scandal underlining the need to reform the country's spy agency. This is the first time an agent from the National Intelligence Service has been detained in connection with the agency's spying activities. The Seoul Central District Court on Wednesday issued an arrest warrant for the agent identified only as his surname Kim for ordering an informant last December to obtain documents that refute claims made by the Chinese police. The documents show a former Seoul city government worker accused of being a North Korean spy entered the reclusive nation, but China's security forces had previously denied issuing China-North Korea border crossing records of him. Kim denies he knew about the forgery, while the informant, who had tried to commit suicide earlier this month, claims he was paid and ordered by South Korea's state intelligence agency to counterfeit the papers. Prosecutors are also probing a consul at the South Korean Consulate General in China's northeastern Shenyang city, who handed over the forged papers. The consul has told investigators that he did not know anything about the authenticity of the papers. The investigation into forgery has now expanded to China, where a team from South Korea and the Chinese Security Ministry plan to determine the authenticity of the documents in question. The latest scandal has severely hurt the credibility of South Korea's spy agency, which had been at the center of a political scandal for allegedly interfering in the 2012 presidential election to rally support behind the ruling party candidate. Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Now, here in Korea, the trend seems to be that more women are finding jobs than men these days, those particularly in their 20s. Statistics Korea says that the employment rate for women in their 20s has surpassed that for men in the same age group for the past 4 years, meaning that the gap is widening. While the employment rate for 20-something women stood at 57.8% last year, the employment rate for men in the same age group was at 55.7%. More and more women have a high level of education, and most are seeking employment. The total employment rate for people in their 20s last year was nearly 57%, 1.3% lower than in 2012. Now we're going to move on to Korea's National Assembly, where the first confirmation hearing in the Bank of Korea's 60-year history is currently underway. Ji-yeon, the nominee for next central bank governor, emphasized the importance of communicating with the market at the National Assembly. ARIRANG News Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Ji-yeon, a veteran Bank of Korea official who's been tapped as the next governor, appeared for a parliamentary confirmation hearing on Wednesday. There he said that he fully acknowledges the importance of communicating with the market. He added that the central bank has to gain the trust of the people, and that trust comes from the consistency and predictability of its policies. He also conceded that the central bank had failed to communicate with the market last April. It left the key rate unchanged while the market had high expectations of a rate cut. The central bank cut the rate by 1/4 percentage point in May. In a prepared statement to lawmakers before the hearing, he said that a rate hike would not put a great deal of pressure on the nation's snowballing household debt problem. The nominee added that the central bank's key rate is accommodative to support the nation's current pace of economic recovery. Experts say his comments are realistic, with many believing the rate has been kept at low levels for too long. They predict the central bank could act on it in the coming months.
As the economy turns into the second half of the year, it may raise once or twice its policy rate.
He takes office in April, replacing outgoing Governor Kim Jong-soo, who has been criticized for a lack of communication with the market during his term. The BOK faces major challenges at home and abroad, like ballooning household debt, financial instability in emerging markets, and uncertainties stemming from the Fed's stimulus tapering. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
The amount of debt held by public companies in Korea has hit a record high of 908 trillion won. That's roughly $850 billion. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that the combined debt held by government offices was roughly $464 billion late last year, with non-financial public enterprises racking up another $385 billion in debt. Now that is a combined debt of $849 billion, which is up 4.2% from a year earlier. But experts point out that the rate of increase is losing pace and say the downward trend is likely to continue due to the government's recent focus on debt management in public offices. Now to some very welcome news for Korea's automakers. New data shows Korean-made cars made up nearly 9% of China's auto market last year, its largest ever market share in the world's second largest economy. The Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade says Korean automakers, including Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, sold around 1.6 million units in China in 2013. Korean auto sales in China have been on the rise for 3 consecutive years now. Experts say Korean automakers should refocus their marketing from small budget models to larger, more expensive models, as the Chinese market for sedans, SUVs, and multi-purpose vehicles is on a rapid rise. And some more good news. Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has retained its place as the preferred IT brand for consumers in the United States and Europe, while Apple has dropped a spot to 5th. This is according to a survey conducted by U.S.-based market researcher Strategy Analytics of just under 6,200 respondents during the months of December and January. Now, Samsung received a rating of 57.2 points, which is 1.5 points lower than its score on a survey from back in July. Samsung was followed by Sony and Microsoft, and HP ranked 4th, beating out Apple. While the preference for Samsung was high in continental Europe, its rating among consumers in the US and UK actually dropped. And analysts attribute Apple's weak performance to a lack of new products. Korea's LG Electronics climbed up from 7th to 6th place. Now, Marvel Studios in the city of Seoul have agreed to film key elements of the sequel to the superhero film The Avengers in the Korean capital. The move is expected to have a significant impact on the local movie industry, creating scores of jobs for local extras, production personnel, and vendors. Our Son Jung-in reports.
It's official. The second installment of Marvel's Avengers franchise, Avengers Age of Ultron, will be partly shot in Korea. The announcement has generated excitement among movie fans, but the news has local economists excited too, with predictions of what the economic benefits to the Korean movie and tourism industries will be. The studio plans to spend more than $10 million, expects to hire more than 120 Koreans for the shoot, scheduled to take place in and around Seoul from March 30th to mid-April. Experts predict that could generate as much as $23 million for the Korean movie industry.
We think this could strengthen Korea's movie production ability. It will also create new jobs, promote tourism, and improve our brand image, resulting in huge economic benefits.
China saw its tourist numbers rise by 6 million in the 2 years after part of the blockbuster movie Avatar was shot in the province of Hunan. New Zealand, where The Lord of the Rings was filmed, also saw its tourism revenue increase by 15% after the films were released. But in addition to the economic benefits, local economists in Korea hope this will pave the way for more opportunities for the movie industry in the future.
There are many sources that affect a country's economy. The actual benefits will depend on how Seoul is described in the movie and how moviegoers actually perceive the city.
Like the Avengers sequel, more and more overseas films are coming to Korea to shoot, a result largely attributed to the Location Incentive Project initiated by the Korean Film Commission in 2011. Thanks to the project, foreign movies filming in Korea can receive a refund of up to 30% of their production costs. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
This is certainly not a good time for Korea's three main mobile carriers, which are under a 45-day business suspension meted out earlier this month by the Korean government. All three carriers, SK Telecom, KT, and LG U+, have also been fined after they were found guilty of giving excessive subsidies for handsets. Now, for a closer look at this issue, we are joined live in the studio by Dr. Kim Byung-ju, the head of KLMP Consulting, and of course, our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So, mobile carriers in this country are currently under a business suspension.
Right.
First of all, what does a business suspension actually entail? I mean, it's not like our mobile phones have been cut off or anything.
I hope not. It is not the case, of course. Those viewers who may wonder whether your smartphones whose service is being carried by KT, SKT and LGU+, do not worry. Your service will continue on. But those of our viewers who might be thinking about changing your phone to an upgraded level, that may not be that easy because of this business suspension. The suspension itself is all about adding new customers, and so that is stopped overall. And so new phones, new numbers, and then switching the carriers. And if your phone is newer than 24 months old, start from the beginning of your service, you cannot change that.
During this 45-day period.
Right, exactly. But if you have an older phone, you can do it. And if you lose your phone or your phone is broken, you can still do it. This is the overall illustration of how the suspension is going to operate. For instance, LGU Plus, 23 days before April 5th, and then after 27th of April, another round of suspension. And so these three carriers, for instance, at a given time, a customer can use one carrier, and the other two will be in suspension in terms of opening new services here.
So the three of them would never collide with one another,
right,
in terms of the business suspension period.
Right, exactly. Earlier, like at the end of last year, they suspended one carrier at a time. And what happened was the other two got into a huge competition, cutthroat competition. So it could magnify the problem. So this time, they just leave one carrier available, and the other two carriers suspension will be in effect. So that's what's happening. And actually, in addition to what you just saw on the screen, there were additional suspensions announced, whose details we don't have yet. So that was the older one, and more detailed one should be made available later on.
Now, let's get to the core of the problem. So this is happening because of illegal subsidies that these carriers were offering to subscribers.
Right.
Now, is this money to make new phones cheaper for us, for the consumers?
Actually, yes. Yeah, we can think, if these telephone service carriers are offering subsidies, it should make our phones cheaper. Yes, indeed, it will make your phone cheaper when you buy those as a subscriber individual. But the thing is, these telecom service companies, they shift that cost to the rest of us as an additional cost in their service charge. So what happens is those smart and wise, perhaps, I don't know, consumers who can switch around different, service carriers, they will benefit. But those of us who are a little bit lazy and want to take time and want to become a loyal customer for a certain specific service carrier, we will lose out because we will get to pay higher service fees for our regular service. So that is a real problem, and that's what government is all after about. And so overall, this has been a problem that has been around for quite some time in Korea. Government has introduced different kind of measures to punish these carriers for this illegal subsidy, but the problem has been growing even bigger.
Now, the sanctions, which are, of course, designed to penalize these mobile carriers,
right,
are actually, we're hearing that hurting innocent third parties. For instance, mobile phone retailers are saying that they are feeling the negative impact from these sanctions.
Right, indeed. This is a classic case of regulatory blunder, in my own view. This is a mistake being made by the government itself, because what they're saying is, as you mentioned, these retailers, they're not exactly retailers, they're like retail agents acting on behalf of these telecom service carriers. And these are the people who will be losing their business for 45 days or even longer. And these are very small business owners whose livelihood is at stake because of this regulation. But telecom service carriers, are they going to be affected? Experts are saying not really. For SK's case, they have over 50% of market share. And this suspension period, they will have to be relaxed and don't worry about losing their market share. And KT is the same thing. They are also concerned about losing their market share under this steep competition. And during those suspension period, they can sit back and relax and don't worry about it. Of course, LG U Plus is a different case. They are in a position having to take up a greater market share from the other competitors. So they're not very happy. But so that's the overall landscape. And as I said, the retailer agents, they're being affected. And also phone maker, like a domestic phone maker, Pentac, whose sales is totally focused on domestic sales, they're very, very much concerned. But Samsung and LG, all other phone makers, they have a great sales overseas, and they're not concerned. So they're saying this is not really actually penalizing or punishing telecom service carriers who have been introducing this kind of subsidies, but it's negatively affecting the rest who have not been directly involved in this practice.
Right, the innocent victims of this sanctions. So in the latest government action of business suspension and its aftermath, what is it that we can learn from it, or what are its key implications regarding the future of Korea's mobile industry?
Several different things here, but in terms of regulation itself, as I touched upon it, this kind of business suspension may not be the wisest choice for the government to actually penalize and discourage telecom service providers from offering this kind of illegal subsidies. Rather, the experts are saying they should vastly increase the fines. For instance, last year, at the end of last year, what happened was these three telecom service providers were fined for about altogether 100 billion won. Sounds like big money, but for them, they've been spending together over 7 trillion won per year for their marketing costs. So 100 billion won is not a big deal for them. So the experts are saying the government should vastly increase the fines rather than using this kind of business suspension that hurts these small business owners or some other third parties. They say this is not a good choice in terms of regulation. And other things is in the long run, the government should think carefully about what to do about this overall telecom market here in Korea, which is incredibly saturated now.
Right.
So what's happening is all these three guys, service providers, are fighting against one another to take additional market share away from the other. And that's why in this process all this kind of illegal practices are happening. So perhaps more encouragement for cheaper phones, like what we call here in Korea altel phone, like economic phones, cheaper price phones. If we can find some ways to encourage the sales of those kind of phones, maybe we can create a new market. But as of now, this market is very, very saturated, very old, and that's where all problems are coming up.
Right, and because not everyone needs the highest end smartphone,
Absolutely.
so that may be something that the government could consider. All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today. We will speak to you tomorrow.
Okay.
And that is all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching. I'll see you back here in less than 2 hours' time on Early Edition at 6.